today we are going to be learning how to graph quadratics when they're written in vertex form. So the first thing I want you to do is complete the do now and graph each quadratic equation using the graphing calculator and the table. So every single time that we graph a quadratic, we need to draw that table. So first I'm going to turn on my calculator, and I'm going under y equals, and write that equation right in the calculator. We're going to go in the table and graph that. Now remember, in the table we look for where the vertex is, and we're going to draw our table right there. Then we're going to graph the function, and we are going to identify the vertex, axis of symmetry, and whether or not this is a maximum or a minimum. And we're going to do the same thing for the second do now. So pause this video, take a second to complete those two, and then answer that question. Okay, so when you graphed the equations, this is what you should have gotten. And then the last question was, do you notice anything about the equation and the vertex? Well, let's look here at this equation and its vertex. Do you notice anything similar about them? Well, in our equation, we have 1, 2 as our vertex. Then if we look in the equation, there's a 1 and a 2. Here I have a 2 and a 5, and there's a 2 and a 5. But if you look closely, here it would be a -1, so the signs are opposite. And here the 2 is a -2, so those signs are opposite. So this is actually leading us into the other way that we write quadratics, which is in vertex form.
So here's the equation of a quadratic in vertex form, and it's y equals a, parenthesis, x minus h squared plus k. So the a value is going to tell us whether or not our parabola is going to be opening up or down. So just like the a value in standard form, when a parabola has a positive value, it's going to open up. Remember, it's that smiley face. When the a value is a negative value, it's going to open down and give us that frowny face. Now, if it opens up with a positive value, that tells you that the vertex would be a minimum, where if it opens down with the negative value, it tells you that there is a maximum. So then from vertex form, we can easily identify what our vertex is in the equation. Now, if we look, the equation is x minus h. So that means whatever your h value is it needs to be negated. So the negative tells you to negate the h value. And then it is plus k. So that tells us that our k value is going to stay the same. So h comma k gives us our vertex. So let's take a look at the first example to try to help us. So first, they're asking us what our vertex is. So we need to look at the number inside of our parentheses. So it's always x minus h. So since it's x minus h in the parentheses, instead of a positive 7, our vertex will have a -7. And then the k value, or that value that's constant on the outside, stays the same. So it's a -8, so that tells us the other part of our vertex is a -8. Then we need our axis of symmetry, and we know the axis of symmetry is just the x value in the vertex. So, and we always need to write x equals because it's representing a line. So it's x equals -7. Then, is my vertex a maximum or a minimum? Well, remember, to find that out, we look at our a value. And here our a value is negative. So that tells us that it is opening down, and we have a maximum. So let's look at example 2. We have y equals x minus 5 squared minus 3. So the vertex. Let's look. What is my vertex here? So we need to look. It's x minus h. So that tells me I need to negate whatever value is there. So instead of a -5, this is a +5. And then plus k, what's my value here for k is a -3. Then we need our axis of symmetry. So this is always x equals, and it's always going to be the x value of our vertex. So it's x equals 5. Then is this going to give us a maximum or a minimum? Well, what's the invisible value in front of the parentheses here? It's a +1. So since it's a positive, it tells us it's opening up, and we have a minimum.
Okay, so I want you to pause this video, take another second, and try the other 4 on your own. Okay, so take a second and check those answers. Notice the bottom one was a little bit tricky, numbers 4 and 5. Number 4, there's no k value there, so if there's nothing there, it is a 0. Same thing as adding 0. And here on number 5, there's nothing in the parentheses with the x, so that means that you would be adding or subtracting 0. So that would give you your h value of 0.
Okay, so next, if I give you the vertex, are you able to write the equation of this quadratic function in vertex form, assuming that a equals 1 each time? So in order to do this, we're given our first vertex in question number 5 of 3, 2. So the first thing that we're going to do there is write out our vertex form of the formula. So every time we're going to write y equals a x minus h squared plus k. So then, first we need to fill out our a value. And a in the equation was given to us is we're told that a always equals 1. So instead of a, we're going to replace it with 1. Then we have x minus h. So that says take whatever our h value is there. And our h value here is 3. So I need to minus the 3. Remember, it's always going to be the opposite. So it's a +3 here, so it's a -3 here. So that makes sense. Parentheses, squared. Don't forget that little squared. A lot of people tend to forget that squared there. Then plus k, and our k value is 2. That's a +2, so you leave it as a +2. And there's our equation in vertex form. Okay, so let's try the next one together as well. Here we have y equals a x minus h squared plus k. So y equals, remember a, they told us that a is always going to be equal to 1. So here we have a 1. Then x minus h. So here I have a -1. So bx minus a -1, which just gives us a +1. And remember, instead of a -1, it's a +1 there. It gets negated, so that makes sense. Squared. And then plus k. Our k value is a -6, so it really tells to plus a -6, which just is a -6 there. All right, so I want you to pause this, take a couple minutes, and try to answer the rest of these examples.
So take a minute here to check your answers. I want you to look at question number 9. In question number 9, your vertex is 0, 0. So that means you're adding 0 to your x squared, and you're adding 0 on the outside. So when you simplify, you just get x squared here. If you look at number 10, your k value is 0, so you're adding nothing. So you could just simplify to x minus 2 squared.
So finally, we're going to look at graphs to create the equation of a quadratic in vertex form. So we know for vertex form, what we need is our vertex. So we're going to look on the graph to try to find our vertex. And we know the vertex is either our highest or lowest point on the graph. So I'm going to look at the first graph, and my vertex is right there. So we're going to write the point for our vertex. And our vertex here is at -3, -1. Then here, just for practice, we're going to identify the axis of symmetry, which we know is always x equals, and it's the x value in our vertex. So it's x equals -3. So then we need to write our equation. So we're always going to start by writing our general vertex formula. Y equals a x minus h squared plus k. And then we need to fill in our values. So we know that a always equals 1. So we're assuming that a equals 1. So we have y equals, instead of a, it's 1. And then we have x. Now minus h. My h value is a -3. So we negate that, so it becomes a +3. And then we're going to square it. And then our k value is a -1. So that would be my equation. So let's take a look at the next one. Now the next one's a little bit trickier. So let's take a look at our vertex. And our vertex here is the highest point. So here we have our vertex of 2, 0. So my axis of symmetry is always x equals 2. Then we need to write our general formula of the equation. Y equals a x minus h squared plus k. So here we have y equals. Now a is always going to be 1, but in this case, it's an upside down parabola and it has a maximum. So that means it's going to be a -1 because it's flipped upside down. Then we have x. Now instead of minus h, we're going to have our h value is 2. So instead of a +2, it becomes a -2 squared. And plus k would just be +0. So then we could even simplify that to y equals -x minus 2 squared. You don't even need that. +0. Let's do one last one together. So my vertex of this equation is going to be here, which is at 0, 0. And our axis of symmetry is then going to be x equals 0. So now our equation, y equals a x minus h squared plus k. So y equals, it's a parabola facing upwards, so that means my 1 is going to be positive. Then I have x. Instead of minus h, my h is a 0. So we can just minus a 0 squared. Instead of plus k, my k is a 0. So it's +0. So we could just simplify that, because when you subtract 0, it really means nothing. And when you add 0, it really means nothing. So really, you're just left with y equals x squared. So I want you guys to take a minute to try the last 3.
All right, so here are the answers for 12, 13, and 14. 14 was a little bit tricky because your h value was 0. So you would get x minus 0, which would just leave you with that -x squared in the front because it's a upside down parabola. So if you have any questions about any of these examples, please feel free to comment and I will answer them as soon as possible. Or if you just have any questions about the lesson or anything in general, if you comment on this video, I'm happy to answer anything.
So I apologize. Any sound effects that you might have heard in the background of this video was Captain chewing his bone or playing with his toy.